We want to get your views on Antonio Conte. It was an extraordinary outburst after that 3-3 draw with Southampton. Before we get your thoughts, just let's get a reminder of what he actually said.
They don't want to play under pressure. They don't want to play under stress. Yeah, it's easy in this way. And Tottenham's story is this. 20 years that there is the owner and never won something. But why? Only for the fault is only for the club or for every manager that stay here. And I have seen the manager that Tottenham had on the bench. You risk to disrupt the figure of the manager and to protect the other situation in every moment. And now, until now, I try to hide the situation, but now no, because I repeat, I don't want to see what I have seen today, because this is unacceptable. There are 10 games to go, and something thinks that we can fight. We can fight for what? With this spirit, with this attitude, with this commitment. For what? For the 7th, 8th place, 9th place? I'm not used to this position. I'm really upset. And everybody has to take the responsibility, not only the club, not only the manager, the staff. The player has to be involved in this situation, because it's time to change the situation if Tottenham wants to change. If they want to continue in this way, they can change manager, a lot of manager, but the situation cannot change, believe me. Thank you very much.
Oh. It's remarkable. You know, he's upset, if we didn't gather. That was the understatement coming out of that. Look, what did you make of it? We want to talk about this all morning. We haven't got time to talk about it all morning, but it's a huge subject. What did you make of it?
Yeah, I'm so grateful that he clarified that he's upset. You know, I love Antonio Conte. He is box office for the back pages, isn't he? And with his sound bites and his nuggets, and he so often, you know, wheels you in and delivers fantastic meltdowns like this. I think this is his best of all time. I've been witness to a few at close quarters, but I do think that this beats the lot, frankly. I mean, he tried something similar, didn't he, at Burnley, if you remember last season, when they lost there just before they got going and sort of got into the top 4, and his justification was for that at the end of the season was that, well, it kick-started our run and we got into top 4. It basically kick-started the players. But if you're a player after that, do you still respect the manager? Do you still play for him? I'm not sure. I think there's so many players that will be thinking, you know, this morning, hey, hang on, how about you? You know, what about your mistakes? Because I tell you, the one thing that I think that Conte deserves more criticism over and hasn't had is not his negative tactics, and he is guilty of that. I mean, Spurs, you know, pride themselves on playing good, attractive football, but it was resting Harry Kane at Sheffield United. You know, he talks about not winning trophies. Well, there was a pathway to a trophy, and he rested his world-class striker, his leader, his top scorer, his talisman, and he thought, I don't need him to beat this championship team. What is that saying about, you know, the Tottenham mentality? That's saying to me that basically we're not taking this game seriously enough, because Harry Kane's one of the best players in the world. Harry Kane was clearly upset by that decision, and sure enough, 2-3 weeks later, we're seeing Tottenham's season completely unravel before our eyes. It's remarkable, but for Conte to pass the buck as he's been doing in this press conference is astonishing. It's completely lacking all self-awareness.
Crossy, on that, I mean, obviously he's hammered the players very explicitly, but as regards the question of how sustainable his job is now, where do you stand in this discussion over whether he actually directly criticised the board? My reading was he did, but I know it's caused a little bit of debate.
Well, a note went quickly round last night, didn't it? Sort of suggesting that no, he wasn't criticising the ownership, and basically it was purely on the players. I think you could read that quote in particular in you know, one of two ways. I just feel when you're so critical of a club's philosophy and the club top to bottom and why they've not won a trophy for however many years, are you seriously telling me that doesn't include the owner in some regard? I just don't buy it. I like Conte, and Conte is, he flies off the handle and completely loses his temper. I think he's probably thought, oh, wow, that's the one that I've maybe pushed a bit too far, and do I want to go now or not? I think Tottenham have just got a really, a fluid conversation to have this morning, this week, as to whether they remove Conte for the rest of the season, because honestly, I'm not sure that he can get the players to respond to his methods once he has this meltdown. I mean, he's lost. He's basically saying, I've lost respect for the dressing room, and I'm sure that the players, in some way, are losing respect for one of the best managers in the world.
With that in mind, if they do get rid of Conte, where'd they go from here? Well,
I just feel as if they've got to go for someone that knows the club, that has done well in the past. Look, I know there's been so much talk about Mauricio Pochettino. I admire Pochettino so much, but I think what he did last time, it would be so difficult to replicate again. And should you ever go back, I think that would be a dangerous path. Who is making this appointment, by the way? You've got a director of football in Paratici. He doesn't quite know his own future at the moment. Will he go for someone that he prefers? I mean, if you're looking for someone, I'm told the chairman, Daniel Levy, wants someone ideally with Premier League experience, then Thomas Tuchel, could he be tempted back? I think there are names in the frame, and there are several names in the frame. Those three might be available now. But, do you leave Ryan Mason in charge again until the end of the season and sort of kind of try and pick up the pieces in the summer? But honestly, they've got this opportunity to get into the top four. So, why would you blow it? I do think you've got to make an appointment that's actually going to take the club forward, and they can still go forward. I mean, they could still make the top four under Conte. That's the crazy thing.
Oh, John, we're going to discuss it more, but thank you very much for joining us.
Cheers, John.
Thank you.
Yeah, so let's get to it then, because after Antonio Conte's outburst, this is what Jamie Carragher tweeted. Conte wants to be sacked in this international break. Spurs should just put him out of his misery and do it tonight. Miguel, do you agree with Carragher at all? Was even Conte the right man for Spurs?
No, I don't think he was. I suppose if you want to impact, and to be fair, I do think it was a feat getting him into the top four last season. But almost the story of Conte's career at club level, basically, he goes in, immediately shows how good a manager he is, but he's kind of performing to a very high level, almost against expectations. Did it at Juventus, did it at Chelsea winning the title, did it at Inter winning a title, and breaking Juventus's hold over the league, and did it in that first campaign with Spurs. And then it's almost like he gets into a situation where he feels, well, I've done my job, now it's time for the club to do yours. And put in these almost unmeetable demands. Now, there is a bigger debate to be had there about how much Spurs spend and how the running of the club, but it still creates then this kind of noise and distraction, and it usually ends the same way. And look at his second season at Chelsea in that regard as well. And the other side of it as well, I suppose, is that this is the cost of appointing someone like Conte, because he has been for the last decade in that group of maybe 5 or 6 absolutely elite managers, so he will bring demands, where Spurs aren't quite at that level at a club, or at least in terms of what they've spent in the last decade, they're not at that level. And it's no coincidence, as Crossy mentioned there, I suppose that Spurs' best period in the last 2 decades has come from appointing an up-and-coming manager, someone who's willing to grow with the club. And I think that's almost what Spurs have to do next, basically. It's almost have to accept their profile, where, yes, they're one of the wealthiest clubs in the world, but still it's a level below where Manchester United are, where Liverpool have been, where Arsenal potentially can be, where Manchester City are. And it means you, when they're making signings, when they're appointing managers, it should be about getting figures on the up, rather than necessarily those at the top of the game. And also I would say, it still feels like Spurs haven't had the complete overhaul they've needed since that first Pochettino team. It's like every signing they make is just bolting on another player, and they're like trying to keep that team going. And almost the appointment of Conte almost felt like an attempt to resuscitate that, when really it does feel now they're at a point where they have to go back to a bit of a year zero, like what Pochettino was in 2014. But that, I have to say, I agree with Crossy. I'm not sure Pochettino going back would necessarily be the best decision.
It's quite intriguing, because last week, this was a man that said, I will die for this club sort of until the end of the season. He'd only signed this 1.5-year deal. We knew that. He wanted to get to know the club. They wanted to get to know him. Now he's come out and said what he said. Why now? Is this a kind of a shot in the arm, as Crossy said, that, you know, it might be trying to spur them on? He's done this before and it has kind of worked. Or is this just an absolute loss of control and actually quite disparaging to his employers?
Conte's won more in his own than Spurs have won. Certainly in the Premier League
That cannot be
history.
argued, I understand.
But it's important because the context of it is that he's in a position to say it. People wonder about what the response from the players will be. What can the response of the players be? What have they won? What have they won? Tell me what has the club won? What can their response to? Tottenham have to decide what kind of club they want to be. You've mentioned the two, you articulated it really well in terms of what they wanted to be and then what they ended up being. And it's almost a mishmash, really. Because if you're going to bring in an elite manager now, give him players to work with now, give him the kind of expenditure that the other teams in the top six have so that he can really have a go. But if you're going to bring in a project manager and then bolt players on, as you were saying, rather than give him the players that can grow as a team with him, then that's going to take time. That's not going to be a here and now. And look, we're debating it now. Over the course of today, here on Sky Sports News, you'll have ex-players who will come on, winners, who will talk about Spurs in disparaging tones, who will talk about when they played and they looked at Spurs and they said, lads, it's Tottenham, and they'll have a laugh and whatever else.
But isn't that the thing, though?
But the soft centre that Spurs have had, and I'm not saying that as a criticism, I'm saying that's the way that Spurs have been perceived over the years.
Yeah, Mourinho's talked about it, but equally, he's employed by them at the moment, and he's got a team.
All right, let me put it this way.
He's responsible.
What did he say yesterday that was wrong?
I'm not.
But part of it was the tone. I mean, you mentioned the lads at Tottenham. It's basically, it's almost the lads at Tottenham speech coming from their own manager. And while there are truths in what he said, I suppose it's all of it together and the tone of it, which does kind of. I mean, there is an argument from Tottenham fans today that's basically disrespecting the entire club in the way the figurehead should be doing. And I think there's a difference between asking questions and maybe.
But Miguel, the problem is, they're fragile about it. But the fact is that there are things in what he said that the club needs to face up to.
I agree with that, Darren, but publicly, does he?
Maybe that's what it needs, because listen, we say it every week. We come on here, we say all the kind. He's saying nothing different to what lots of people are saying on the outside. And sometimes, when you have somebody like that who's won things, who knows how to win, who knows how to challenge a football club, you need sometimes to listen to what they're saying. People are going to say, "Oh, he's come. He was never the right fit. It was a hit job and all of that." That's all. That's all misdirection and deflection. The fact is that you could get someone else in and you'll continue in the same vein. One trophy, 25 years? League Cup in 2008, League Cup in 1999. What else? Pushing for the top four.
But also he's got to protect his own.
He wants to win.
But absolutely right, because if you look at his, he's got Serie A ×5 with Juventus, Coppa Italia, Champions League ×1. UEFA, Italy's won a runners-up in the World Cup. He's done it all. But he's also got to preserve his reputation. So was that a little bit about doing that yesterday?
Also, even if a lot of what Conte said was right, if part of this is to try and kind of get a response from the players, well, the effect of that is immediately undermined by the reality that the players themselves know he's probably off in the summer. So I mean, like, what does that do to the atmosphere of the dressing room? And even the idea, like, it won't have the same consequences because the manager is likely to be off and possibly doesn't want to be there.
I think. All round, and you're right about that, the clarity is needed and has been for quite some time. It could be the fact, and he's not blameless in this because the style of play hasn't been particularly good. But why hasn't it been good? Because they don't have the defensive base to build on. So he's got to play five at the back, but they don't have the quality across the back line to be able to even with five across the back, keep clean sheets. So they win against Chelsea and West Ham with clean sheets, but then they lose 4-1 to Leicester. They lose to Wolves. They beat City, but they draw with Southampton. There's an inconsistency about them that has characterised their time by and large over the last 2.5 decades. But I just think, as far as he is concerned, And you know, there'll be lots of people who say, no, get him out, I want someone else. But who are you going to get? This whole talk about Tuchel is fantasy, because Tuchel, when he goes to
It'd be similar to Conte, actually.
Exactly. Yeah. And what has Conte said that's different from what Redknapp said when he asked for Saha and Gary Cahill? Sorry, when he asked for Tevez and Gary Cahill, and he got Saha and Ryan Nelson. You know, what has he said that was different from the last days of Pochettino? And Pochettino said, I'm not a magician. Conte, I'm not a magician. Pochettino, we need a rebuild.
He said a little bit more
Conte,
than I'm not a magician,
but they're both using the same language.
It's funny, like if you speak to people kind of close to Pochettino, and they still think one of the turning points in the club's modern history was in the summer of the 2017-18 season. Whereas they didn't spend in that year of 2018 by Lucas Moura, Liverpool sold Coutinho and brought in Van Dijk and Alisson, and Liverpool went to the next level. And the belief is that could have been Tottenham, but they didn't actually kind of build them or have that overhaul them when they were ahead.
And this isn't about, I mean, I've said this before, and I know you had a couple of fans. I've been on fans' podcasts and stuff. This isn't about hammering Daniel Levy. This isn't about hammering the club, because the club are very open about this. They're very transparent with fans, and they talk about the restrictions that they have. I'm just saying that if you bring in a manager like Conte, he is clear about what he wants to do. Even when they achieved top 4 last season, he said, I'm not used to challenging for top 4. I want to win. I want to challenge higher up the table. But Spurs don't have the expenditure that would require, that would assist something like that, which is why I go back to what I'm saying. They've got to decide what kind of club they want to be, because if you want to keep Conte, it needs more expenditure, sustained expenditure over several windows. You can't have years when you don't spend anything. And if you look at the other teams in the top 6, they've all spent. Arsenal spent. Liverpool spent. City and United spent. You have to.
But also, this was a man that said he was happy with what was spent, because maybe he hasn't said what he wanted to say. I know, but then why hasn't he kept his counsel this time around? But anyway, we could talk about this all day. What do the papers say? Moving on.
Well, it's made all the back pages. I've picked 2 out. For one of them is Antonio Conte on the back page of the Sunday Mirror. And all of us, Neil McClemmen's been hit there for the Sunday Mirror, but Miguel, you and I have both been in press conferences, not least involving Conte, where he's spoken his mind. But all of us go to games. Sometimes you think it's going to be a straightforward victory, as this looked as though
as it should have been, really.
I mean, I was on the way to Sainsbury's to get Mother's Day cards. It was 3-1 up, and then I came out, and it was an inquest into them dropping the points. But I think as far as the Telegraph is concerned, they've actually changed their headline. Their first edition was Conte having a go at the failings of the club, and they've changed it post the press conference to Conte Spurs exit.
Why do you think they did that?
Inevitable. I think they judged them. Listen, I can't speak for the Telegraph at all. The only thing I can assume is that maybe looking at the tone and the response that it had in the subsequent hours, they might have changed it. But again, I can't speak for why they've decided to do that. But it does look as though it's going to happen. All I would say is that it's far from cut and dried, and there's a lot of pearl clutching, but sometimes you need to hear the truth, and it's not as straightforward as getting rid of him.